So Antonio, we are here in Italy at the World Wine Symposium. So you are a wine expert and I am a wine amateur trying to understand a bit more about wine. You are working at the Wine Advocate and together with Robert Parker, whose influence in wine purchase is really huge. So today everyone wonders who or maybe what will be the next wine expert. And it seems that you are getting more and more influence at the Wine Advocate. So what it is that you want to bring in terms of value to your readers?
Well, I mean, the first thing I have to say is it's just an absolute thrill to be here. We're in a beautiful place. The Villa d'Este is one of the most beautiful hotels in the world. The collection of la creme de la creme of wine people, amateurs, collectors, wine producers, people who make barriques, I mean everything, importers, and it's just an incredible collection of people. In terms of the Wine Advocate, I mean, I just think our primary mission is education, and I want really to help educate our readers by giving them as much information as possible. I don't want people to drink the wines that necessarily that I like, but I want to help you and all of our other readers find wines that you like, and if you were to someday say, as somebody once said to me, which was a real honor, when a gentleman said to me, "You really helped me understand my palate," that would be the highest compliment that anybody could ever give me, because I really view that as our mission. So that is why, as I explained in the seminar the other day, I don't think about a style versus another style. I don't think about wine as a competition. What the value is that I can offer you and our readers, I and our other critics, is that we go to a region, we spend a lot of time there, and we taste everything, and then we say, in our opinion, it's always personal, of course, in our opinion, these are, the best wines of the year, these are the best wines in let's say an under $25 price range, which in the United States would be considered an entry-level wine or a mid-level wine. So that's really the value of the professional critic. But I don't ever want to impose my taste on somebody else. I want to help our readers figure out what they like.
Well, that's what strikes me. I mean, as a beginner or an amateur, is that I have my own taste, which is my taste, and unfortunately, it is not your taste. How could you guarantee that your personal taste does not influence you when you put a grade on a wine?
I think the first thing that you want in a critic, whichever critic it is that you might read, and this is true not just of wine but of film or music or restaurants, is that the critic has to be consistent to themselves, so that in the sense that you always know when you're reading somebody what their track record is, we all have likes and dislikes. You have a sense of what somebody's way of thinking about something is, and if a person stays consistent to that, then you can sort of gauge a little bit, whether you're going to be in agreement or not based on if you've followed previous recommendations. It's true, we all have our own personal tastes, so that's why, again, I'm not trying to impose my taste on anybody else. I'm trying to say this is what I think is these are the wines of excellence in Napa Valley's 2010 vintage. There's part of wine tasting that's subjective, but there are parts of it that are pretty objective. Does the wine have flaws? Does the wine, the quality of the tannin, is it fine? Is it raw? The fruit, how well defined is the bouquet? These things are technical wines definitions that are not totally objective, because nothing can be totally objective, but it's certainly much more subjective than saying I like this or I hate that. Is the wine medium-bodied, full-bodied? These things you could get 9 out of 10 people to agree whether a wine is light-bodied or full-bodied, right? So there's part of wine appreciation, but also wine criticism that is objective. If you were a music critic, you would say that orchestra is out of tune or it's not out of tune. I mean, that's very simple. It's not a question of whether you like it or not. But if there's a major flaw, then it's pretty obvious. And so part of it's objective. I'd say the basis is objective, and then on top of that there's a layer of subjectivity, because it's not just whether I like it or not, but to what degree do I like it? Do I like it a little, a medium, or a lot? And that's the difference how you get a wine that's it's a 92-point wine versus a 95-point wine versus a wine that's 98 or 99 or 100. And at that level, at that very high level, let's say 97 and up, it's really an emotional reaction to a wine. You know, last night at my table, somebody poured us the 1970 Clos de Pape. It's a Châteauneuf du Pape. It's not a region that I know as well as other regions, but that was just a wine of the heart. What I said to my table mates is, this is the wine of the heart. It's just so beautiful. Now that's an emotional reaction. Now a lot of people at my table had that same reaction, and that is not a formal tasting, you know, like with 100 wines where, you know, you're tasting 100 wines in a focus setting. That's one wine at dinner. It's a different type of tasting. But there's an emotional component where the wines are really great. And I think for any taster, the highest part of the score of the rating system is going to be devoted to those wines that are wines of the heart.
There are people who say that wine should be discovered and tasted blind, and some others who don't think the same thing. So, what would you say? What would be your recommendation for, you know, wine amateur who is discovering a region, blind or not blind?
I think it depends on what the objective of the tasting is. There are settings in which blind tasting is highly suitable, and there's also settings where blind tasting is not going to give you really the information that you seek. If your goal is to taste 20 wines from Bordeaux and to taste wines from not so prestigious chateau against prestigious chateau and see if the wines from the top estates are really better than the wines that cost 1/10, then blind tasting might be very useful to you because you've removed the label bias. Now, personally, I believe that critics most of the times can and should be able to exclude label bias. Because if you own an iPhone, that phone was reviewed in technology magazines by people who knew that it was from Apple. They didn't review it blind. And the restaurants that got 3 stars in the Michelin guide for Paris or for Northern Italy, those were reviewed by critics who did not go to those restaurants and just sit there with a blindfold and eat, right? So the professional critic should be able to exclude those factors. Look, we're all human, we all make mistakes, but you know, the idea of bias is one of the reasons you might want to taste wines blind. The reason you might not want to taste wines blind is because you want context. Today we tasted 8 wines from Domaine de la Romanée-Conti.
You were very lucky.
Yeah.
You were very lucky.
I'm very lucky. I know I'm very lucky.
It's true.
No, it's a dream job. But we tasted 2009, 1999, 1979, and 1966, Grands Chazot and Richebourg. And the purpose of that tasting was to compare the 2 terroirs and the vintages. And so if you want to draw some meaningful comparisons, you have to know what you're tasting.
Sure.
Along those lines, our readers, which we're very fortunate at the Wine Advocate, we have a very sophisticated reader, they have complex questions. There are questions like came out in that tasting. Is this a vintage to cellar or not to cellar? Is this a great vintage for Grands Chazot or Richebourg, or a so-so vintage? How does, let's say, Grands Chazot compare to the other wines in the Domaine de la Romanée-Conti lineup in this vintage? And if you want to answer the complex questions, you need to know what you're tasting. Sure. And that's like a restaurant reviewer who tells you that today this chef is at the peak of their career, or they tell you this chef is slipped a little. Why? Because they have context. They've been following that chef in all of the places that he or she has worked. They know their career path, their trajectory, and they can tell you, today she is at the peak. Or today this person's going through a little bit of a so-so patch. But you need the context. So blind versus blind to me is really, what is your goal? What is your objective? What questions do you want answers to? And that should tell you whether blind tasting is the best format or non-blind tasting.
Yeah, it's clear. Antonio, what do you think about all these wine lovers who are putting grades and comments on specialized social networks for wine? Do you think that it's a valuable source of information? Do you think that maybe it could be the future of wine tasting notes?
Well, there's clearly some things that sort of crowd information can offer. I think the biggest value potentially for those social networks is that, yes, I can spend 2 weeks in Burgundy, like I'm going to spend at the end of the month, and I will visit 7 or 8 domains a day, and I will taste all of your 2011s and the 2010s, and then I'll write them up. But in 5 or 6 years or 10 years, when people start to drink those wines, somebody is going to want to know whether they should open up, their 2010, I don't know, let's say, just to keep with the example, they're going to want to know whether they should open their 2010 Domaine de la Romanée-Conti Grands Échezeaux. And the social networks will tell you all the people who've had that wine recently and what their experience is. Now, there's no critic who could possibly do that. I'll taste that wine once every couple of years once it's in the bottle. So I can give you a snapshot, maybe every few years if I'm lucky. But crowdsourcing can give you a lot of different viewpoints about whether that wine is ready to drink or not. So there's clearly some value. The danger is you have to know which people are giving the inputs, because if you look at a lot of these sites, first of all, you never know who's got an agenda. In other words, who's selling wine, who wants to increase a rating. You see this a lot with restaurant reviews and travel reviews. You never know if somebody's mad, what their motivation is. But if you know who the people are who are putting in that information, it might be useful. But on the internet, there's a lot of junk, just like there's a lot of value. Okay. So my view is this. We're lucky. We write for a very specialized group of people, right? And I'm pretty sure that if you inherited several million euros tomorrow, you probably wouldn't go to the internet to try to figure out whether you should buy Apple or not. You would go to your financial advisor, or most people with a lot of money would divide those assets amongst 2 or 3 people, and you would find a trusted advisor to manage that money for you, a professional. That doesn't mean that you don't have input. That doesn't mean that they don't ask you what your objectives are. But at the end of the day, you find a specialist. Same thing in medicine. If you ever needed a serious medical opinion for you, for a loved one, for your kids, you wouldn't go to the internet to say, well, gee, my son has this, what should I do? You'd say, okay, you'd call your friends and you say, okay, who's the best person that I should talk to? You would get 2 or 3 people and you would consult with them and you would make a decision. Okay, our goal is we want to be one of those trusted advisors. That doesn't mean that we're going to get it right. That does not mean that you shouldn't listen to what your heart says if you love a wine, and let's say I don't. But let's face it, today, here at the Villa d'Este, at the Davos du Vin, are all producers of a very high caliber. They all make wines that have a certain cost. And so therefore, to buy them is a big investment for most people. It certainly is for me personally. So if I'm going to put that kind of money into something, I might want to have 1 or 2 or 3 professional opinions. I won't always agree with them. Okay. But I think that's the value of criticism. That is what we aspire to be, is to be one of your trusted sources.
Can you summarize in a couple of words we should know as wine amateur, or how we should do to increase our pleasure in wine tasting?
Well, I think it's pretty simple, because it just involves homework. What would I do? I would find 2 or 3 friends or couples who have similar interests. You each bring, you say, tonight we're going to taste 2009 red Burgundy, or we're going to taste Saint-Emilion, one vintage or a couple vintages. Each person or group brings 1 or 2 bottles, and you taste them together. Because the great thing about wine appreciation is it's a lot of fun to sort of get to the next level. So what should an amateur do? Find a group of people that you can taste with, who have similar interests, and start to put together little soirees or dinners to taste wines thematically, because that is really important, to get 8 or 10 wines that are all similar so that you can see the differences. So it could be 2009 red Burgundy, but it could be 2009 Saint-Emilion, or it could be 2008 Barolo, or whatever. But you put together a thematic tasting, and then you can sort of see for yourself. And again, there's nothing better than your own palate. A guide is great, because if I go to Paris, I can't go to every single restaurant. I need the Michelin guide or some other guide to say to me, this is what you really should not miss. And that is the value of the wine critic. You can't taste every wine. I can't either, but I try.
So it's a matter of sharing wine with friends.
Sharing wine with friends thematically, and just seeing what you like.
Antonio, would you agree to do that with me now?
Sure.
All right, let's go.
Andiamo.
Thank you, Antonio.
Thank you.
Okay, follow you.
Okay.
To share a good bottle of wine together.
Okay,
bye now.
One or more.